Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your Friday afternoon learning with us here at our final Wheelhouse Talk of this semester. For those of you who I have not had the privilege to meet, my name is Grace Tummel, and I serve as the Assistant Director here at the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies. In my last few weeks, I've been really lucky to have conversations with members of our community that knew our founder, Ralph Hauenstein. As someone who never had the chance to meet him, I was introduced to his legacy through this lens of local heroism and celebrity. My naive understanding of Ralph as a celebrity is always developing, but one specific leadership quality has had me in this place of continual reflection. From those who knew him best, they shared that he listened, and that was what made him such a powerful leader. Our Wheelhouse Talk speaker series allows each of us to spend time doing just that. Today, we get to gather here virtually and listen to a powerful leadership story of one of Grand Rapids' most influential leaders. I, for one, am immensely grateful to be able to listen and learn from the students in our Cook Leadership Academy through our semester of programming and from community leaders at public events like this. Thank you for your understanding and flexibility as we transition this afternoon's programming into the virtual setting. And thank you for all of our staff for being able to flip so quickly. As we continue to live through this pandemic, difficult leadership decisions like this are made on a daily basis. I'm eager to hear from our guest this afternoon, Tasha Blackmon, on how her values and experiences inform her ability and rationale to make these decisions. I would now like to introduce one of our Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy fellow candidates who will be moderating today's discussion. J. Levi Alford is a third year in our Leadership Academy and is majoring in biomedical sciences. And it is truly a privilege to work with and know him. Jay shares the leadership quality of listening first with Ralph and will take that ability to be an exceptional leader in our medical field. Jay and Tasha will begin with a discussion on Tasha's leadership journey for about 30 minutes, followed by questions from all of our audience that are tuned in here live. Please utilize the Q&A function on the Zoom toolbar to submit questions at any point throughout this afternoon's discussion. Jay, I will now invite you to tell us a little bit more about Tasha before we dive into our discussion.
Thank you, Grace, for the kind remarks. And once again, I want to thank you all for joining us for our third Wheelhouse Talk of the year. Just to reiterate, I'm J. Levi Alford. I'm a third year fellow candidate in the Leadership Academy, and I'll be serving as our moderator this afternoon. I wanted to take time to introduce our speaker and our leader who is going to be joining us today, Tasha Blackmon. Born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Tasha Blackmon is a dynamic leader, mentor, and coach who brings more than 20 years of business experience to her current role as president and CEO of Michigan's largest federally qualified health center. Cherry Health provides integrated health care services to over 60,000 patients in West Michigan. Since joining Cherry Health in 2005, Tasha has championed health justice through aggressively disrupting healthcare disparities. She has led numerous large-scale expansion and development projects and has held 6 positions within Cherry Health before becoming the CEO in 2018. As an accomplished and mission-minded leader, it is imperative to Tasha that our community is healthier, one patient at a time. As an eloquent and inspiring speaker, and I can attest to this, Tasha has a way of being heard on behalf of those who do not have voices, and for those whose voices have been silenced. She is passionate and personally driven to ensure that all patients are served in her home community, surrounding areas, and receive the highest quality of care. Tasha holds a Bachelor of Science from Michigan State University and an MBA from Cornerstone University. And in addition to that is a 2020 ATHENA Leadership Award recipient. Tasha also holds many professional and community groups and serves on those in her native home of Grand Rapids. I want to thank you tonight for joining us, Tasha Blackmon.
Well, thank you, Jay. I really appreciate that introduction, and it's been really nice to get a chance to get to know you as well. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So as we kind of sit here and have a conversation, everyone has an origin story, even our leaders. I think the logical way to begin this discussion is to talk about how yours started. Can you share a bit with us about your upbringing, your family, and how you were raised?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned earlier, I was raised right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I am a product of Grand Rapids Public Schools. My parents were actually teenagers when they had 3 children. So by the time they had the 3rd child, which was me, I'm the baby, they were still in their teenage years. So in so many ways, we actually grew up with our parents. But it's interesting because even though they were young, they really had the wherewithal to know that education was really our best opportunity to live a better life. And while they were blue collar, they did struggle a bit. For many years, I remember, eating carbs and, for full meals, like the full meal were carbs. And, I think that experience growing up in a home where we didn't have most of the things we wanted, but we did have everything we needed, including love, I think set the stage for my brother, sister, and me to grow up and to really start to pursue some goals that were meaningful to us. I think the other thing about kind of my childhood is that my parents raised us in a faith-based home. So we went to church, we participated in activities with the church. We were also encouraged to pursue our passions, like what were we excited about? So at the time I wanted to sing, I wanted to cheer, I wanted to run track. And they really encouraged me, as well as my brother and sister, to do those things, to really explore the world. But I will say that my parents were pretty strict too. And I think they drilled into us the importance of being integral. They drilled into us the importance of caring about others. And I would say that they drilled into us the importance of honoring them in our actions. They would remind us, now remember, you represent us when you're out there. And we took that to heart. But I would also say that my parents were both fun and funny because, like I said, they were so young, we grew up together. I'll also say that upward bound was really important to me while I was in high school. So the summer before my 9th grade year, I participated in a college preparatory program. And that particular program allowed students to live on campus while you studied with actual college professors. And it got my parents accustomed to this idea that I might be leaving eventually to go to college. It helped us with, applying for scholarships, applying for actual college entrance exams. And again, it made it so that by the time I actually went to college, it was like, hey, I've been doing the summer college opportunity for 4 years. So I felt very comfortable transitioning into student life at Michigan State University. So I also had coaches, teachers, counselors, other folks that were really supportive of me. And I had really great friends, which one happens to be your aunt. She was super smart. And, I tried to surround myself with really positive people at all times. So that's really the childhood of Tasha Blackmon.
I sometimes hear the expression, I don't know if you use this or heard this, that you're the average of the 5 people you're around the most. Do you feel like that's kind of a summary of kind of what you were just talking about?
And I think so, because I think about all of the friends and the people that had such an impact on my life, especially from the beginning. I would say that that's true. My grandmother, who is someone that I admired and really looked up to, she had this intuition that I think she passed down to me. She would call it discernment, but it was like this gut feeling that you have when you're making decisions or when things are happening in your life. And so, yeah, I would say that would be true. Even thinking about like Matilda, who was an achiever, who was a really excellent student. And while I wasn't as good a student as she was, she made me want to aspire to be an even better student. So yeah, I think that's true.
Great. So in terms of just leadership, I don't think it's just a straightforward, this is what you need to be a leader. Like, this is what you need. I think it's an individualistic type concept, and it means different things to different people. So kind of tell us about what leadership means to you and who you are as a leader.
It's really, it's a great question. And I think people ask me that question often. And I think that they want me to say, hey, I've been thinking about being a CEO since I was, 12 years old. And that really isn't my story. I think that while I didn't set my sights on becoming a CEO, I think organically I would just be selected to lead. And I think in those instances, I took it as more of a responsibility rather than an ambition to become like this leader, if you will. I knew that I wanted to give back to my community on a certain level, even as a younger teenager, with volunteerism and things of that nature. So I saw leading in that sense as an extension of just my desire to want to help. Now, in terms of the kind of leader that I feel that I am, I think I'm a steward leader. A steward leader is a leader with a style that is focused more on others and how their expertise or how their behavior, how their attributes really serve others in a way that brings them up, that helps them to rise. So I would say that I'm more of a steward leader. I really try to embody the spirit of yes, where if I can say yes, I will say yes. And I'm saying yes from an earnest place. Like I want to help seriously and sincerely. And again, it's not based on ambition or wanting to be recognized. It's just something deep down in my heart that I want to do. So I always say that really, I did not choose to become a CEO at Cherry Health. Really, it kind of chose me because that wasn't what I was setting out to do. And like I said, I think that I'm a non-traditional leader in so many ways. I don't think I necessarily fit the profile of what someone might consider to be a leader of an $80 million organization. But I think that's exactly why I accepted the assignment, to become the CEO of Cherry Health. I wanted to disrupt stereotypes. I wanted other people that look like me to see that, even though you may not look like the traditional CEO, that doesn't mean that you can't be a CEO. So I wanted to be that for someone else. And I also, again, took it as a responsibility to not only kind of move into those roles, but to do so while maintaining my own authenticity. Because oftentimes when you move into a leadership role, I think if you don't appear like someone else, or if you're different, you try to assimilate. And I really wanted to try to preserve that part of me that I think is, that's that Black girl magic, if you will, and that girl power. And I wanted to preserve that. And sometimes that's challenging. I remember going to a place and I had my natural hair just kind of curly. And someone on a board told me, you look like you stuck your hand in a power outlet. So those are the kinds of experiences that you have. And, I remember someone else telling me you should wear black or navy blue all the time. You should basically dress in a masculine way. Well, the next time I saw that person, I had on bright red because I reject all of the things that people tell me and, that I have heard throughout my career that makes a leader. We get to decide how we want to live, how we want to dress, how we want to wear our hair, and how we want to present as a leader. So, I've learned a lot along the way, and I try to also encourage and embolden other women to also own your space as a leader, and don't let anyone define or shape the narrative for what that means to you.
And that's crazy, Tasha, because when I think of it too, I think of kind of 2 points. As you were talking, I was thinking of something I was told when I was younger. Being a leader is being willing to not pull the ladder up when you get up to the top. And I feel like you kind of embodied that through your journey. And also too, we always told when we're younger, it's okay to be different. It's okay not to be the same as the person next to you. That's what makes you unique. And in your case, and in many other cases, your uniqueness can lead to great things, leadership and new discoveries and new ways of thinking that weren't previously thought of. So that's excellent.
Yeah, no, agree.
So, and that's a perfect segue kind of my next question, which is, how does being a non-traditional leader, how that kind of lead to your big break from the corporate world? Because when you think of the corporate world, just in general, you think of, like you said, the gray suits, the boardroom tables, the very prim and proper, and just the non-traditional things. How did that lead to your big break from the corporate world, and what did it feel like?
Yeah, so, I actually started in a Fortune 500 company. I worked for a subsidiary here in Grand Rapids, and I was there for many years. I was actually there for 10 years. So I'm unique in the sense that my very first job out of college, I was there for 10 years. Now, I held many different roles within that organization, but I was there for 10 years. And, after that corporate grind, which, I was able to kind of build some leadership skills in that role, was promoted very quickly into a coordinator role. And then I learned, you know what, this is pretty cool. Like I really enjoy business. And I think I was sharing with Jay offline that my path started as a pre-med student. So my degree is actually in physiology, which, for all of the science students out there, we didn't have a lot of fun in college.
I agree.
Yeah, so started in physiology, and I shadowed an individual that was a doctor, and just, experienced their life as something that I didn't want for myself at the time. Now, since then, I've realized you can be a doctor and work a consolidated schedule and still have work-life balance, but that wasn't what I saw in that situation. So then I started to think, this job that I'm in right now, there's kind of a business feel, but how do I honor the education that I received from Michigan State University with this new kind of innate business sense? That's how healthcare administration happened for me. So that was just, something that I did not, again, I didn't plan on that, but it's happened, and I've leaned into it. So it's been, it's been great. So I got to a place in that corporate role though, where I felt like, I really want something more out of work. I want my personal values to be in alignment with the values of the organization that I was serving. And while there was some of that at my prior job, I wanted to do that on a greater level in my home community. So I started to pursue different opportunities to volunteer and other things within the Grand Rapids community. And I ran into Chris Shea, who was actually the former CEO of Cherry Health. And at that time, I learned about Cherry Health, that it served the underserved communities in Grand Rapids with medical, dental, behavioral health, and all of these great things. And I just couldn't believe that there was a place like that in my hometown that I had never even heard about. I'd never heard about it. So when I ran into Chris Shea at one of these events, he told me more, and I made some decisions about, this is really what my heart is pulling me to. This is where some of my skills are pulling me to. And this is probably gonna lead me to my ultimate purpose in this life. So a year later, I got an opportunity to start working at Cherry Health. And that role was truly a step back for me. It was actually, a cut in pay. It was a cut in leadership position. But, that move wasn't about the money at that time. I had a sincere interest in helping my community become healthier. And, again, it led me to Cherry Health. So when you ask, what my big break was like, that really was it. I started from the bottom, and my daughter might say, now I'm here, but I don't feel like you ever get there. And once you have, once you think that you're there, that's how you really know you need to go back to the basics, because you never arrive. And I think that that's what kind of drives me personally, is that I'll never feel like I have it all together. I'll never feel like I'm that perfect leader. I'm always going to continue trying to improve my skills to get better. I was telling my leadership team the other day that my father used to say, nothing beats a failure but a try. So if you fail, that's because you actually tried. So nothing beats a failure but a try. And I just kind of use that as something that helps to guide my life. And I think that's why I tend to approach things without a high level of fear. You know, and it's not that I'm never afraid, because I am afraid at times, but you know, I think that that's just why I'm not a fearful person, because I think you have to try to know.
That's true. That's true. Let me stop by saying I really appreciate your daughter's Drake reference. I really like that. But that's great, because I feel like once you get to the point where you can be at almost like the pinnacle of success, there's always room for improvement. Like stagnation, I think sometimes leads to the loss of innovation. Like you're not allowing yourself to grow, not allowing yourself to build. And sometimes I think that stunts the growth. So that's crazy. That's great. Kind of want to shift here.
Okay.
From kind of the corporate to the nonprofit world, and kind of about the skills that it takes to kind of navigate between those two. So I guess maybe my question is, like, what skills were important as you transition from the corporate to the nonprofit world, and what new skills did you need to develop in order to become successful?
You know, I would say that a lot of the skills that I developed during my time in corporate America, you know, they're definitely transferable into the nonprofit arena. You know, I learned, you know, management 101 there. I learned conflict resolution. I learned, you know, how to get things done, how to push through when things are hard. I learned how to scale in the for-profit industry. I learned how to consolidate if that was necessary. So I picked up a lot of skills that even going into the nonprofit arena, I think were definitely transferable. But what I would say is that nonprofit work, it requires a level of creativity and diligence that I think that because of the fact that there aren't this like excessive amount of resources, you've got to make $1 out of 15 cents, okay? And this is just something that you've got to do in the nonprofit arena. So I think while we really try to set people up for success in nonprofit, there are times that it's just difficult because you're resource strapped. So I think there's kind of a level of figuring things out on your own to a degree. So I was able to do that. I researched, I studied, I failed forward, which is how I kind of, you know, would suggest that people look at failure. I failed forward a few times, bumped my head a couple times, and figured some things out. So, you know, I had already come to Cherry Health into this nonprofit world with such a level of compassion for people who were facing challenging situations. But I would say that my level of empathy deepened when I came to Cherry Health. I think that also networking was a big thing for me as a nonprofit leader, because, you know, the fact that you don't have all of the resources to do all of the things that you dream of as a nonprofit, you got to figure out how to partner with other agencies who are doing something similar. And then you leverage some of those relationships to get things done for your organization. So I would say that the networking thing was pretty big as well. But by and large, I would say that the majority of the skills that I, you know, started to develop as a for-profit leader, I'm continuing even today to still develop as a nonprofit leader.
That's great, Tasha. And I kind of want to like maybe take a back step here, because I really like was intrigued by something you said about this idea of failing forward. That's my actually first time hearing that phrase. Can you dive into that a little bit and how that helped you so much?
Yeah, you know, when you fail forward, you normalize this whole idea of failure because you grow through failure. So I'm going to give a personal example. When I was about to start my MBA program, and early in the morning of that day, which also happened to be my birthday, you guys, I learned that I would be getting a divorce, okay? So when you're getting a divorce, that's a failure, right? It's a failure. I think we would all agree that it's a failure. There are reasons for it, but it's a failure. So I had to make a decision. I'm starting my MBA later today, which also happens to be my birthday. So I can either wallow in the sadness of divorce for the next 2 years and not come out any better for it, or I can really redirect that energy to ensuring that myself, my daughter, my organization are all better for whatever failure that I've had, in my marriage. So that really is an example of failing forward. And I have to tell you, I finished my MBA summa cum laude, and I also completed a fellowship at the University of Kansas Medical Center at the same time. So, I threw myself into caring for my daughter and bettering myself so that, again, I was better for it in the end. So that's an example of failing forward.
That is a very persevering story, and snaps to the graduating class, the signal for sure. So kind of based on your stories, it sounds like you're willing to make a pretty big change when you kind of see your life kind of making a pivot. So when things aren't working, how do you pivot?
When things aren't working, you identify, first you have to be honest with yourself that things aren't working. Sometimes we put on these rose-colored glasses and pretend that something, is working that really isn't working. I'm saying wake up. We got to wake up, and we've got to, be aware of the fact that this life isn't promised to any of us. And when you fail, and when it's time to pivot, you have to realize time waits for no one. So what I try to do personally is I don't wallow in sadness too long. I mean, there's a place for it, but I'm one of those people. I really try to transform that energy into something that I can, do that's productive, that, is going to move the metric down the road, or, is going to improve someone else's life. So pivoting, I think the first step to pivoting is acknowledging that there is even an issue and that needs to be addressed, and then figuring out what the steps are to addressing that problem. And, it's funny, a lot of people will say, I know I need to do this. And then they even know the steps that need to happen, but that activation is what I think that's hardest for all of us. Even when I think about, weight loss or all of these things, that activation, we know what we need to do, is doing it. That's the hardest. So, there's that, again, ability to push through when you got to pivot, and knowing that you might make some mistakes along the way. And guess what? You might have to pivot again, but even that's okay. Normalize failure, normalize change. And I think we will all be better for it.
I think the biggest thing too, kind of thinking on that subject, Tasha, is I feel like you grow the most when you're doing it when you don't want to be doing it. Like your weight loss example, like the days that are hardest to go, when it's snowy, it's cold, something new just came on Netflix. Those are the days where the true leaders or the true perseverers are made. So I really resonate kind of with your statement on that. Yeah. So speaking of pivoting, I'm going to pivot yet again and kind of talk about your professional ethos of sponsorship, because it seems to be like a really big thing for you. And because for some of the folks that are on our call today, what is sponsorship? And how is it different from mentorship? Because I know a lot of the times the two can be interchanged and kind of confused. And why is it important to you? And in a bigger picture, maybe leadership.
Yes, I'll start with mentorship. Mentorship is where someone takes another individual, let's say under their wing, and they help them to develop professionally. They might share best practices. They might be someone who's in a career that you're interested in going into. They're helping you to really develop from a more internal standpoint. Sponsorship would be that individual that could have been a mentor before, but at some point that mentorship transitions into, wow, this person has that it factor. This person has potential. And not only am I willing to mentor that person and to help them to grow, I'm actually willing to leverage my personal network to make sure that that person gets to their next step. So then that person might come in and say, hey, this person deserves this job, and I am going to endorse their credibility. And, you know, I've been doing some studying, some researching on the topic of African-American women and their underrepresentation in senior leadership. And, you know, as I've been studying this phenomenon, you know, some African-American women do make it to middle management, but then you think about that throughput necessary for them to get from middle management, for example, to CEO. And what I'm really deducing is that sponsorship is a big piece of it. So, you know, how do you get people in front of folks that can sponsor them, that can, you know, give credibility to the hard work that they've already put into it? Because the truth is, if your smartest, brightest people, you know, wanted a job and they got a job tomorrow, we wouldn't have this challenge. What still remains is that some of our brightest lights, no matter what your background, they don't get the exposure to the people that are decision makers, to the people that can help them rise. So that's why sponsorship is so important. And I've had a couple of sponsors in my life. I've actually had sponsors that were not mentors. So they sponsored me really based on their, it's called benevolence in research. It's called protege benevolence. So it's like that connection that you just feel when you meet someone and you're like, wow, you know, this person is amazing. And I can't put my finger on it, but they're just great. So I've had people mentor me from that standpoint. But Chris Shea, the prior CEO of Cherry Health, he was also a sponsor of mine. He literally took me under his wing. He allowed me the opportunity to bounce around the entire organization and to learn at least enough to be dangerous in every single department before, you know, he was ready to retire. And it was almost like, wait a minute, you're retiring? He was like, and you're ready. You know, you've had an opportunity to be exposed to the entire organization. You're ready to step into this. So that's why I say, really, I didn't choose it. It chose me. And I think that he was a bit sneaky with, you know, giving me all of those opportunities. So then I couldn't say no. But, you know, I think that, you know, whether it's sponsorship or mentorship, they are different, but I think they're both necessary. They just have a different outcome. Like I said, mentorship, people grow through that, which is awesome. Sponsorship, people actually move to the next level.
And definitely on that sponsorship thing, it kind of reminds me of a story I was told a long time ago about kind of investing in people and pouring into people. I was thinking about the story I was given was, if I loan you $5,000, Tasha,
Yeah.
or if you have $5,000 and you lose it, that's a Tasha thing. If I loan Tasha $10,000 and she loses it, that's a we thing, because I've already invested in you. So it's one of those things where if you get people to invest in you, invest in your success, like you said, more opportunities and things will open up to you that previously might not have been there.
Absolutely.
So also kind of talking about developing after you get to that point, what does leadership development kind of mean to you? Because a lot of us in the Cook Leadership Academy have taken different DISC and Myers Briggs and things like that, kind of understand kind of how we are and understand other people. What do you think about that? And how do you continue to develop as a professional and as a leader, even being in a position like a CEO?
Yeah, no, I think that all of those assessments are great. It's really important to get to know yourself, and you need to know everything about yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities. And I think you also need to understand how each of those attributes impact your leadership, because, you know, even those things that are weaknesses, they're going to have an impact to your weakness. And, you know, I had an executive coach who actually said that your strength overused can be a weakness. And I thought that that was an interesting concept, but it's true. It really is true. So let's say you're analytical. If you're overly analytical to where you can't move anything forward, that becomes, you know, a deficit potentially for you. So, you know, again, getting to know yourself is great. But what I would say about getting to know yourself, Jay, is you change over the years, you grow, you change, you have experience over the years. So just because, for example, you all are taking the DISC assessment now, you're going to want to take that again in a few years. And throughout your life, you want to take those assessments to get a better and deeper understanding for who you are, how you present as a leader, and maybe what some of your opportunities are. And then you have to be intentional about those areas of improvement, and then accept both your strengths and weaknesses. I think it's important to embrace every part of who you are, because that makes you who you are, and that makes you your authentic self. And one of the things that I realize about myself is being okay with, even those weaknesses is really important, because someone else out there is basing what they feel is their potential on how you move, how they see you move. So I think it's really important, for us to even be open and honest about that. I think it's also really critical as a developing leader to put brilliant people around you. There are some leaders that are really intimidated by people who are smarter than them. I would say put the most brilliant people around you that you can, so then you're able to offset your strengths with their strengths and weaknesses, and vice versa, and that's how you create like this amazing team. I was just telling one of my team members, she's a CFO and she's amazing, that she's brilliant, and I'll readily admit that she's smarter than me. And together, I think we make a powerful team. So I think it's recognizing that people, are important, they're necessary, and that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. But if there are things that you need to work on and develop, be serious about that and be intentional about doing that.
And that's a really big thing, because it's almost like leaders sometimes are afraid of mirrors. Sometimes you have to look in the mirror to kind of know who you are as a person, to be able to lead others. And along with your point about surrounding yourself with brilliant people, it's really big. Always heard, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Exactly. So and it's so true.
That's so
true. Yes.
So I also asked our audience on Zoom to utilize the Q&A function to submit some questions to Tasha, as we're almost to that Q&A portion of the evening. Okay. But I have two more quick questions to kind of sneak in really quick. One of them is a lot of my contemporaries and I in the Cook Leadership Academy this year have kind of been discussing this theory of imposter syndrome, feeling like you're in a place where you don't belong, or you're in a room where you don't belong, or even in a group or a job where you don't belong. Yeah. Even at a position as prestigious as a CEO, the pinnacle of success, do you still feel an imposter syndrome sometimes? And if you do, how do you combat it?
Absolutely, I feel it. I think that, most good leaders at some point feel that they're an imposter. And I think that, for me, it fuels me to want to continue developing and enhancing my skills. But I feel self-doubt just like anybody else. I feel like there are other people who deserve opportunities that I've been given, like even this particular opportunity today. I can think of 30 other women who would be great to have this talk with you. But what I do, instead of kind of focusing on that long term, I know that they're awesome, and I also create opportunities for them to be able to do these things later. So guess what? You guys are going to get some recommendations for some folks that you should consider bringing forward. And I do that in everything that you guys see me doing in the community. I'm always lifting other people along the way, because they do deserve to be out front. And I don't take any of this for granted. I am a humble and willing servant. But just like I said, like everybody else, I do feel that self-doubt from time to time. And, I was studying Dr. Clance. She was the person in 1978 that theorized the imposter syndrome. And, I think about even how I was raised. My parents raised us to believe that we belonged wherever we found ourselves in life. Even despite that, you know, there are times that you feel inadequate. And my mom and I, we were talking recently about how they raised me. I felt total love, you know, but I also felt like my parents were really stern in raising me. They did not coddle me. And, you know, they gave me like this really strong resolve to push through things. And, you know, now I realize it. And I also kind of picked up as a child that they raised each of us kind of differently. And that's what you have to do. You have to modify your style to help your child bring the best out of them. And I think that my parents were able to do that. But what I would say is my parents also ingrained in us this positive self-speak. And I think in our case, and this is how we overcame the imposter syndrome. In my case, it was scripture. You know, like we learned not the entire Bible from front to back, but we had a couple solid scriptures that when we were feeling hopeless, that we could reflect on. There were also affirmations that we would say that would help us to get through those tough times. And, you know, I think that has played a significant part in how I've been able to kind of deal with the imposter syndrome. And I have to tell you, Jay, you guys' generation, it's even harder for you all because of social media. You know, it's so easy to fall into this trap of comparing yourself to other people instead of working to reach your personal best. So I really have a lot of empathy for you all because you go through so much with the social media piece. But how do I overcome it? So I think how I overcome the imposter syndrome is I'm honest with myself. I'm honest with myself and others. And, you know, I realize that it's a normal feeling. It's normal to feel that way. And, you know, sometimes I think it's important to sit in that feeling because it actually does make you want to, you know, improve and sharpen some skills. Iron sharpens iron. So sometimes when you don't feel good enough, you can combat that with really working to improve on some of your skills. I think you can tell yourself that just because I feel inadequate in this moment, that doesn't mean that I am. I may feel inadequate, but that doesn't mean that I am actually inadequate. And I talked a little bit about failure earlier. I think you just embrace failure because failure is going to happen. And I think that letting go of this idea of being perfect is a big piece of that. You know, we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. And that's the beauty of life, is that those mistakes shape our character. It shapes who we are. What else? I would say when you're dealing with the imposter syndrome, take a look at your strengths and weaknesses. It's almost like do a SWOT analysis on yourself. What are my strengths, weaknesses, my opportunities and threats? And then think about how can I improve? And as a leader, what I do is I work to put people around me, as I said earlier, that can offset my weaknesses. And I think that that's critical. I think the other piece is celebrate when you do great, you know, great things. And that says a lot because I think oftentimes we magnify the bad and minimize the good. You know, if you think about it, we'll go on and on about something that happened that's not great for a long time. And then we might just glaze past something that's excellent. So don't magnify the bad and minimize the good. Let's celebrate. And I think that helps as well. I would say finally, if you're feeling the imposter syndrome and it's starting to kind of overtake you, seek out a parent, maybe a supervisor, an executive coach even, or someone to help you kind of work through those feelings. For me, I think my tribe, the people that I surround myself with, they also are positive minded. They help me to feel that even when I'm not feeling great about myself, they remind me that these are some of the things that you've done. You actually are great. So, you know, snap out of it. So, you know, I think that, you know, again, who you surround yourself with is very important. So long answer to a quick question, but I think that is something that we deal with and we have to normalize it and be open about the fact that all leaders face it at some point.
And that's great. And that's very encouraging hearing that from a CEO, because it's just that image sometimes of a CEO is everything's perfect, it's right. I just have everything in order. I wouldn't have got here if I didn't. Just hearing sometimes that it's not all roses and it's not all sometimes a highlight reel, that it makes it more attainable, makes it more something you can grasp. So Tasha, thank you so much. We're gonna kind of switch gears here into our Q&A session. And I'm gonna ask you a few questions from our Zoom audience, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So I have one on here. It says, you serve on boards all across Grand Rapids. How do you navigate community involvement on what to say yes to and what to say no to? Kind of the whole too much food on your plate type thing.
Yeah, so what I do initially is I don't participate in board opportunities where I don't have a personal passion for it. So that's where I start. You know, it's got to be meaningful to me for me to even accept the responsibility, because, you know, I'm not going to do anybody any service if I'm not engaged in the work. And there are a couple of committees that I sit on in the community that, you know, we've got to be there and be present. I may not be as passionate about the work, but it is important to be there. But in terms of board membership, I'm not going to accept a board membership or a board appointment, even if I'm not committed to the work. But so some of it is for me. There are some boards that I sit on. They align with my personal mission. Children's Advocacy Center is an example of that. You know, the YMCA would be an example of that. The Michigan Primary Care Association would be an example of that. But there are also some boards that I sit on when I think about how Cherry Health and our patients who need access to services, how they can be impacted by some of these bridges that we're building. So I also look at it from the standpoint of, you know, how will this allow us to get closer to achieving our mission? So I look at our mission orientation for, you know, the boards that I choose to sit on as well. And, you know, there are times when somebody really wants you on a board and you're like, I'm not sure how I feel about that. And what I try to do in those situations is I try to find someone else who really is passionate about that work. So, you know, then that solves their challenge and it allows me to maintain my authenticity by only being committed to the things that are meaningful to me.
And that's a huge thing too about not knowing the answer. I'm going to find you someone who does. Because there's a lot of people who will be in that situation and say, I'll take it. It's just something else I can put on my resume, something else, a notch on my belt. But I think that's a very big thing, being able to admit, this isn't my passion. This isn't where my interests lie, but I'm going to find somebody who can help you in this situation. So I know that's a huge thing. Oh, we have another question from Jacob. It says, thank you for coming. You talked earlier about work-life balance. Is this something that you still seek to preserve today? And if so, what steps do you take?
Oh yeah, I struggle with work-life balance. I'm just gonna be completely upfront with you all. One of the things that I didn't struggle with though is, you know, my daughter had a competitive cheer meet, I'm there. You know, she has something happening at school, I'm there. I think what I struggled with was really putting myself last and not practicing the self-care that I need to practice. And, you know, one of the things that I've learned in life in general is that we make time for the things that we want to make time for. Mm-hmm. So what that means for me now is that I'm doing 6 o'clock workout sessions. I don't really want to work out at 6 o'clock a.m. I'm not, you know, I tend to be a joyful person in general, but I don't want to wake up at 6 o'clock a.m. and get yelled at by my personal trainer. Shout out to Christian Woods at No Limit Fitness. But he, you know, you have to make time for the things that you want. And, you know, we haven't even talked about the fact that, you know, I have a blended family of 6 children and an awesome husband. And, you know, Lauren, my daughter, who's on the line here, who's at Grand Valley in her last year, there are a lot of competing priorities. So work-life balance, I mean, it is real. But what I can tell you all is that when I get to a place, I notice I kind of start to identify when it's time to press pause. And I do it before I hit a wall. And I think that that's one of the best skills that any student, any leader, any person in general can cultivate so that you don't hit the wall. So I think that I take breaks when needed, but I think that I need to do better in that area.
It's always hard to have that work-life balance. And I agree with you. I'm not a morning person, so I'm totally against the 6 a.m. early workouts.
That's the only time to fit it in when you're working 13 hours a day on a regular basis. So you got to do what you got to do.
I have another question from one of my friends, Uwe, in the Cook Leadership Academy. He asked, what would you say are some of your biggest challenges as a CEO and a leader today, like in today's world, or maybe like right in this moment?
So what are some of my current challenges as a CEO?
Yeah.
You know, my biggest challenge as a CEO right now has to do with workforce shortages. So as you all know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the pandemic has been really, really tough. You know, there are times just during the last, year and a half that I had to make decisions that were not popular, you know, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. And the truth is, some of those decisions that we made at the very beginning of the pandemic set the stage for us to be okay right now, you know, as an organization. So, you know, you have to make unpopular decisions. So if you're a person whose goal it is to be liked, like if that's something that's really important to you, being a CEO is probably not the best job, because I mean, you're making decisions that 100% of your team are not necessarily going to be behind. I mean, and again, at the beginning of COVID, I had to make a decision that even my executive leadership team were like, we're not sure about that. And I love the fact that they could say that to me. But, you know, as someone who tends to be a consensus leader, wanting to hear the input from my team, I had to say, you guys just have to trust me. And there was no playbook during COVID. So, you know, you had to make decisions truly based upon your gut. Now, there was some data that you could use to make decisions, but this opportunity really got me in alignment with my gut to be able to make those tough calls. And so I would say workforce is an issue. And one of the hardest things is just, you know, sometimes it's very lonely because you're making decisions that are not popular.
And that's the biggest thing about being a CEO. Like I've like kind of hearing from you and just hearing anecdotes from other people is being willing to step out on that ledge when nobody really wants to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And realizing that, you know, even when your team steps out on that ledge, you're left holding the bag, because ultimately you're responsible. You're the person responsible, and being willing to shoulder that. So I think that you do have to have broad shoulders. But I also think that, you know, like with programs that you all are in with the Cook Leadership Institute, you all are developing that now. So I'm just excited to see what our future leaders, you know, are going to look like in 10 years from now, especially with the interaction that I've had with you, Jay. I'm really impressed with you.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you so much. I think we have time for maybe one more question. This one's from Carly. It says, what are some of the ways in which you've advocated for equitable healthcare, including how to help the Black community?
So Cherry Health is a federally qualified health center. And we started, the health center movement started in response to the Civil Rights Act in the 60s. So it was part of the government's response to addressing access to care issues and barriers to healthcare for marginalized communities. So while, you know, Cherry Health is not necessarily an organization that only serves Black and Brown communities, we serve everyone. The majority of our patient population is actually, they're people of color. So about 60% of our patients are people of color. And, you know, so when you're looking at people who've been historically marginalized, who have not had access to healthcare, they're going to present with some unique needs. And I'm sure you all have talked about social determinants of health. You know, you're going to really identify how where they work, learn, live, and play kind of impacts their experience and their ability to reach optimal health. So one of the things that has been really important to me and to my predecessor was quality of care. So 3 years ago when I started, I knew that quality was going to be something that was important to me, and not just important as a checkbox exercise. We're going to do some things that, you know, across our organization that truly improve the quality of our care. And we really started this work, I'm going to say 5 years ago. And, you know, when I moved into my role, we were able to push it further even more. Well, as a result of those efforts from our clinical staff, from our informatics staff, from, you know, an entire organization filled with people who just want to see our community get healthier, we received a national award 2 years in a row now. And it is the top quality leader from HRSA, which is a Health and Resources and Services Administration. And from both administrations, from the Trump administration as well as the Biden administration, they gave us acknowledgments for our quality health outcomes. And that's something that we're super proud of, because in our 30-year history, we had never received that. So when I tell you that we take healthcare for all communities seriously, and we're also, you know, working with each group to determine, hey, what are your specific needs? And we actually work with each person, with each individual. And what it's called is personalization. So we take a look at their specific circumstance, and then we tailor a treatment plan around that individual so that they can meet their individual healthcare goals. So that's one of the things that I do, but I also partner with other agencies, Carly, to ensure that we're not just focused solely on healthcare, because healthcare is just a part of it. You got to look at all of those social determinants as well. So we partner, for example, with the community food store, which allows folks to come in and through a membership of, I believe it's $13 a month, they get like 30 days worth of food. And they get these points, and the points relate to the food that you're getting. So for example, a high point food would be something that's unhealthy, and a low point food would be something that's very healthy. So if you get 30 points, you have an opportunity to really spend the majority of your points on healthy food. You'll get more food, sorts of things. So we're partnering with many other organizations. You probably are aware we're in the GR public schools, you know, working, you know, from that angle. You know, we're working with other partnering agencies to, again, make sure that our patients have access to all of their needs, because healthcare is just one in a sea of needs that our patients have.
That's huge. That's huge. And it's not just a singular thing. Like when people think of healthcare, I think some people's minds go, somebody in a hospital bed. It's an entire spectrum or sphere of care for a person, the whole person.
It is the whole person. So Cherry Health actually created a national model, nationally recognized model, which was called integrated care. And part of the magic in that is that we co-locate many services under the same roof. So you might have a medical provider, a dentist, a behavioral health provider, a vision provider, and a pharmacist all in the same building, because it's removing every single barrier to that individual receiving the care that they need. And then they're going to work with a community health worker who helps them to address any housing needs that they might have, to address any, you know, food insecurities that they might have. So all of these things work together to help people reach a place of wholeness, you know, so that they can be successful contributing members of our community.
Thank you so much, Tasha, for giving us your time and giving us your lessons in leadership. And we are all grateful for it. And I'm speaking for everybody, I think, in saying that. So,
well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
I cannot believe it's already been an hour. I feel like I could have listened to the two of you talk for another hour, probably more. What an honor it has been to just listen and learn with the two of you. I really appreciate both of your time. All of our guests who are with us today, thanks for choosing to call in on this Zoom. I wish Tasha and Jay, you could see all the applause and all the totally elated faces, because I know it was a true treasure to be able to listen to that and be able to learn from you. And Tasha, I'm going to take you up on those 30 other people that should have been on this screen, so that we can get more folks like you in our room, because I learned a lot, and I think the rest of our community did as well. So thank you again, and thank you to our guests. Our next event for the Howenstein Center will be in just a few weeks on December 9th, when HW Brands returns to Grand Rapids to talk about his newest book, Our First Civil War. Thank you again. Tasha, I see the chat flooding in. Our fans are ecstatic, are happy, and what a great way to end this week together. Everybody enjoy your weekend. Thank you for leading by listening with us today.